Hello there, and welcome to the Archive in Between, where I read stories collected from across the dimensions. Take a subscription so you can find me again if you wander off. Today's story doesn't have a name, but I'd like to call it Can't Be Too Careful by Eat My Username on Reddit. I'd had a long career. A storied career, some might say. Outstanding, impeccable, illustrious. I'd earned my retirement. The acreage I'd built for myself was far from the troubles that I had once participated in so gleefully. It was a homestead of a sort, for there were gardens to the north side of the main building, orchards to the east, and a beautiful vineyard to the west. Between all, nervous honeybees buzzed, busily collecting the pollen and nectar to be stored at one of the estate's many hives. When my head of household called me to the anteroom that morning, I suspected there might be some trouble with this evening's dinner. A decision about wine pairings, perhaps, or a question of sauces. Such things occupied my mind much these days, and I reveled in the quiet banality of the decisions. There was a simple joy in the rewards of one's labors. Being out pruning the grapevines or tilling the new garden beds, there was a joy that I never found in my previous work. Simple and honest, pure and uncomplicated. Alas, when I attended my trusted servant Pontius in the waiting room of my grand house, I found no simple joy awaiting me, only old, ugly pain. The first man I knew instantly. His name was Davis. He was an unpleasant man, both in temperament and appearance. He looked disheveled, even by his usual standards. He had worked under me once, a long time ago. The second man took me a little longer. He was a pale man, on the short side, with a mane of almost white blonde hair. He stood awkwardly and was similarly disheveled. His name had been Dante, back when I had known him. At that time he had been my adversary, being the student of my worst enemy. His power had been minimal, a small invulnerability quirk. Nothing special. The recognition took me less than a quarter second, and by the end of the next I had already figured out my plan. That had always been my forte after all. Accept all the data, even the minute. Process. Make a plan. Execute to perfection. I threw my arms out wide. "Davis, my good fellow! It's been such a long time." The criminal slunk forward and allowed himself to be embraced. And folded by his ear, I whispered surreptitiously to him, "Who is this with you?" Davis broke into a sob and, pushing back from me, began to cry, "Doctor, I cut him off sharply. "Davis, you misspeak. In this home my name is James. The other name belongs to someone else." He nodded solemnly, sniffling. Apologies, Sir James. It's just, we're in trouble." I quirked up an eyebrow and looked at Dante. He tried to make eye contact, but his eyes fell to his feet. Then the fallen hero muttered, "It's true, sir. It's my old master. He's hunting for us, and we just thought you might, because of the old days." I smiled. "I think I understand." I turned and gestured behind me into the guest room. "Please, come and sit and make yourself at home. I'll have some tea brought for us, and we can talk it over." The men sullenly filed through. As they passed me, I could smell the dried blood of their wounds, and the sweat of a man who has been hounded for his life. I made lingering eye contact with my servant, and gave him a friendly nod. He scurried away to fetch us a drink service. A good man, my head of household. I'd recruited him years ago, and I can seldom recall how I functioned before he had come into my service. The man had a preternatural gift for understanding one's mind without asking, and, more importantly, he was discreet. The two haggard refugees plopped themselves noisily into the settees that occupied my lounge. They sat morosely, with their heads held deep in their hands. After a minute or two of restful silence, Pontius arrived, carrying a tray of drinks. There was a decanter of water with tumblers, as well as a pot of tea, with 3 fine bone mugs. The servant also deposited a plate of sugar biscuits. The men fell ravenously upon the food and drink. Before Pontius had even receded to his place by the entrance to the room and closed the door, each man had drained a glass of water and downed several biscuits. I coughed quietly, and the two men looked up suddenly from their rapture, seemingly aware once again there was someone else in the room. "Sorry, gentlemen. I appreciate you must be very hungry, but I was hoping we could discuss things a little before we go any further." They both nodded, crumbs falling from the stubble of their beards. I smiled reassuringly. "So the old fellow is chasing after you, is he?" Dante answered first, cutting off Davis. "He's lost the bloody plot. He disowned me 3 months ago, and he's been chasing down some vendetta like a frenzied bloodhound." "A vendetta?" The hero-come-refugee just shook his head. "I don't know, sir. He wouldn't tell me." To this I nodded, and, turning back to Davis, asked, "So how did you two come to be together?" The henchman's mouth was agape. "Together?" "Today, I mean." "We're old friends. He came to me, and I told him I could get us somewhere safe. Someone to help us." "I see. So you're just an idiot, then, not a traitor." Abruptly, I stood up, and the two men tried to follow suit. Each man fell to the floor. They were confused at first, and then the pain kicked in. They both screamed loudly as their bodies twitched and spasmed uncontrollably. I walked over to Dante and began to search his person. He tried to claw at me, but I swatted away his feeble arms. There was blood pouring from his eyes now, and his mewling had become subdued as his lungs filled with blood. I found what I was looking for, laced into his tattered clothes along his shirt's armpit sleeve. Tracking device. Broadcasting. I turned to Pontius, who had remained standing at his position, nonplussed, seemingly disdainful of the mess the two men he had just poisoned were making. "We're compromised. It's time to move. Burn the whole place." He nodded. He knew how much I hated complications. Thanks for stopping by and listening to the story. Take a subscription. It'll lead you back if you get lost, and it'll let you know when I'm ready to read again. If you have any ideas about what I should read next, let me know in the comments, and I'll try to get the author's permission if I don't have it already. With that, I must bid you farewell, but I look forward to seeing you again when it's time for me to tell another tale.